hopefully we'll have the majority of the folks on and we'll get into the bulk of things. Does that sound good?
Yeah, one second. Hey, Karen.
Yes.
Yeah, just make my bio real short. Just keep it short. And then that'll save more time.
Me too.
Oh yeah, me too.
Wait a minute, y'all don't tell me what now I'm the hold on a minute.
Okay, you thought you were going to run. Come on, Karen. How you thought you were going to invite all of these D&I people and you was going to run something? You got 4 co-moderators, man. Come on. You be lucky to get a word in.
I'm going to say what I want to say.
And I believe you.
You always do, Karen. You always do.
Yeah, I believe her. She said that. I believe that.
There's that Delta stuff coming out. Here you go.
See.
I'm gonna be quiet. I should have worn my pearls today. I'm gonna be quiet.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Oh.
Well, we can already see it's going to be a great conversation. So let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and open us up, and then we'll jump right in and let you guys get started with the conversation piece of this. So this is being recorded. I know I've seen Jackie you started the recording, so thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carnessa Samana, and I'm the chapter chair for the Ohio WinUp organization. I'd like to welcome you to today's event, Let's Talk About Social Justice. This event is a collaboration between AEP's African American Employee Resource Group and the Ohio chapter of WinUp. So I've said WinUp twice. I'm going to tell you what it stands for. WinUp is the Women's International Network of Utility Professionals. And our organization is dedicated to connecting, developing, and recognizing women in the utility industry. WinUp was formed in 1999, but our roots go back much further. WinUp is actually an evolution of another group called the Electrical Women's Roundtable Incorporated, which was founded back in 1923. So EWRT was conceived at the annual meeting of the Society for Electrical Development, which happened on Henderson Island in Lake Ontario. So you can imagine a meeting about electricity or electrical design back in 1923 was probably mostly male. There were women at that event, and they did come together at that event at a round table, hence the name of their organization, and through their conversation discovered common career issues among them. After that meeting, they continued to come together to discuss and address representation and challenges within the industry. And so 97 years later, we are continuing these discussions. Today's conversation is focused on the specific challenges of African Americans in terms of representation and challenges within our society. I'm proud that WinUp continues to encourage and embrace the conversations needed to move forward in this space. If you're interested in joining or learning more about WinUp, you can go to winup.org or winupoh.org. Before we get started, I just want to give you 4 housekeeping items. First of all, I just want to let you guys know if you are not a presenter, you cannot be seen or heard. So you can't take yourself off mute, you can't show your video. People will only see the 8 of us that are on here. If you want to ask a question, you need to use the chat functionality or the Q&A functionality. And so during the conversation, myself, Jackie, and Brittany will all be monitoring this to insert your questions into the conversation. The other thing I want to say is in your WebEx screen where you're seeing the videos, there is a little white round circle in the top right-hand corner. You can switch to a grid view. So if you click on that button, it'll give you some options. If you're not already in grid view, you may consider going to grid view. That way you can see all the panelists speaking. And then the last housekeeping item is after the meeting, we're going to send out a survey with some follow-up materials, including recommendations from the panelists. So please take a few minutes to answer the survey. That your input means a lot to us. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Like many of you, I'm a fan of Brene Brown, and I want to share 2 Brene Brown quotes to kind of set the tone for today's meeting. One of them is, Being held accountable for racism and feeling shame is not the same as being shamed. And her second quote I want to share is, I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. So today's event is an open conversation on social justice. For those who were here a little earlier, started hearing the panelists talk about this, we're really looking forward to having a conversation. Our goals around this are really to increase our understanding of social justice issues, understand why and how to have conversations, and to understand what can be done to be an ally. We're not here to shame anyone. We want everybody to have an open heart and mind and approach this with a learning attitude. Today's conversation is going to be facilitated by our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of American Electric Power, Ms. Karen Ashley. I met Karen back in 2016 when she started at AEP, and I was the current chair for the African American Employee Resource Group. Since that time, Karen has really moved the needle on AEP's diversity and inclusion strategy. Karen also represents AEP at national diversity forums and conferences, and we're just thrilled to have her today as the facilitator. So Karen, I'm going to turn this conversation over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Carnessa. Thank you so much for that introduction. And also I want to say thank you for your leadership of the Ohio chapter of Win Up, and extend also my gratitude to you, Ohio chapters of Win Up, the chapter of Win Up, as well as the American Electric Power African American ERG for giving me the opportunity to serve as your facilitator for today's panel discussion. To the viewing audience, I hope that you all are in for, I want you to know that you're in for a treat today. As Carnessa said, if you heard a little bit of our conversation before we started, we definitely have a very experienced panel that you're going to hear from today. And we're going to make sure that we create an environment, even in this virtual space, that is safe, and that is more of conversational and will be more of a chat. So I want you to wrap your minds, your heads around that, and just feel yourself being in a room where we're just sitting down having a really good, candid conversation. So I am going to start by introducing our three panelists for this afternoon. Danielle Harden is an experienced compliance manager with a demonstrated history of working in the financial services industry. Danielle brings nearly 20 years of experience in her craft, in her trade, in her profession. She's skilled in consumer and mortgage lending, regulatory compliance, consumer banking, risk management, risk assessment, and operational risk management and control testing. Danielle holds a Master of Science in Jurisprudence, focused in financial services compliance from Seton Hall University School of Law. Danielle is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the oldest Greek letter organization established by and for African American college educated women. And let me just stop right there and say, Danielle, I am wearing this paisley pink jacket in honor of you. Thank you very much.
I love it. It looks great on you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Danielle is a native Ohioan, and along with her husband, they enjoy watching their two children play in competitive sports. So Danielle, thanks for being here and welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me.
Next up is Scott Horton. Scott Horton is the former director of diversity and inclusion consulting at IBM. Currently, Scott is the owner of Delta Concepts Consulting. And Scott, your consulting firm holds a very high reputation for your inclusive leadership, understanding, and managing unconscious bias workshop. And we know it has been held at Coca-Cola, UPS, Capital One, SunTrust, the Southern Company, AEP, Macy's, and for the PGA Tour organization. Scott brings to the panel 30 years of training and consulting experience, including 10 years in higher education and 20 years in in the corporate arena. Know, Scott, that your unconscious bias inclusive leadership session also, you had an opportunity to conduct the session at UPS's Singapore for their team. So kudos for that, now we know that even your workshop experience expands to the global market. Scott holds a Master of Arts in Higher Education Administration from, let me get this right, the Ohio State University. Also, I've lived in Columbus long enough to know if I don't say the, I get kicked out. So the Ohio State University. Scott, you also hold a Bachelor of Business Administration and Human Resources from James Madison University. And you are a native of Pennsylvania, but has lived in the southern U.S. for most of your life and career. So, Scott, thank you for being here and welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Karen. OH. Oh.
And last but not least is Dr. Shelton Goode, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Icarus Consulting, which is a veteran-owned firm that helps companies build a diverse workforce and create an inclusive workplace. Dr. Goode, or Shelton, brings over 20 years of HR and D&I experience. You've held executive positions in several global companies, and you've earned the reputation for being a strategic, results-oriented leader whose expertise spans talent management, change management, and executive coaching. One highlight also for you, Shelton, you were the first person awarded the Roosevelt Thomas Lifetime Achievement Award. And Forbes magazine recently selected you as one of the top 10 D&I trailblazers in the country. A native of, I know,
Philadelphia.
You want to move your head to the side just a little bit? So there we go, a Philadelphia Eagles fan. So Shelton, thank you for being here and welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
All right, so as we've discussed, today's conversation is going to be just at a light conversation, but on a very timely and serious topic, as during the course of 2020, we have seen just a tremendous amount of racial unrest. And then also this year, there's been so much going on. I was having this conversation the other day that we've almost forgotten how the year started with the loss of Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi and the rest of the passengers who were on that helicopter with them, that there has just been so much going on this year. Every month, there's one thing after another. And unfortunately, the over-policing we continue to see happen, where just this week, we learned about incidents in San Antonio, Texas, my hometown and state. And then we've also now are beginning to learn about a situation in Rochester, New York. So this year continues to be very heavy for us. So I say it again, conversation is timely. And so looking forward to what you all will share with the viewing audience today. So before we get started with the first question, there is an Oxford scholar by the name of Theodore Zeldin, who there's a quote by him that I absolutely love and I think is appropriate to set us up for this conversation. And so the quote reads like this: "Conversation is a meeting of minds with different memories and habits. When minds meet, they don't just exchange facts, they transform them, reshape them, draw different implications from them, engage in new trains of thought. Conversation does reshuffle the cards, it creates new cards. So, as we have this conversation today, I want to remind the audience and challenge the audience that at the end of our time together, let's not walk away reshuffling the cards. Let's make sure that we walk away with new thoughts, with things that we can do differently, things that won't look the same for us, that we take ownership in doing everything that we can to help make this world that we're living in a little bit more harmonious and inclusive for everyone. So, with that said, panelists, are you all ready?
Absolutely.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's talk about this. You know, we continue to find ourselves in this country being brought back to this same place. Protests, marches, demonstrations. You know, we think back to some of the footage that we see, even in black and white, right? The color, black and white on television. That's how long we've seen demonstrations around racial equality and the call for racial justice take place. So here we find ourselves in 2020, right? Just what, 4 or 5 months away from 2021, still in the same place. So my question for the panelists to get us started is, why are we still here? Why are we still having this conversation? Why have we as a country, the United States of America, why haven't we moved on from this conversation? Who would like to get us started with their thoughts on this? And I would love to hear from all of the panelists this question. Scott, go ahead.
Well, I'm happy to throw my 2 cents into the ring. Actually, just on the introductions, when you introduced Shelton and reminded me that he and I both have a legacy and a connection to Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, who was a mentor of mine and a force in Atlanta, where Shelton and I both have roots. Karen has some roots in Atlanta. He taught me the work of Edgar Schein, who, my memory of him, I don't profess to be a scholar about culture, but Edgar Schein gave us this model that culture of an organization, of a country, is like a tree, and the roots of the tree are invisible. We can't see the roots. We only see the trunk, the branches, and the leaves, and the fruit, possibly. But the fruit of the tree always matches the roots. It's actually impossible to graft. He used to say this all the time. It's impossible to graft an oak branch onto a cherry tree. The cherry tree will reject it. So that's a little bit of a setup to say that our country has had a 400-year history of roots that are really deep around race. And folks who look more like me, I think, we sometimes can be dismissive. We hear those statements all the time. Like you just said, why are we still talking about this? Didn't we pass laws that made people equal? And what they're talking about is the stuff in the branches. They're talking about some of those things we're trying to graft onto the tree, because we, as a country, we want to create a perfect tree, but often the roots don't line up with what we're trying to graft onto the tree, and we keep coming back to rejection of the new thing we're trying to do. So sadly, I'm not surprised that we're still here, because we haven't reckoned with those 400 years. We haven't had significant conversation, and too many hearts haven't opened to recognizing collectively our part in trying to create a more perfect union. And we're not going to get out of it this year. So many companies called me in July wanting to do things, but we got to do stuff. And I'm like, if you think you got to do it in July, it'll still be here in September. It'll still be here in January. I mean, I'd love to work with you in July, but if you get around to it in January, we'll still be, ready to talk about it. So that's my take on it. I'd love to hear Danielle and Shelton's ideas.
Yeah, I actually was recently reading a book called The Color of Law, and it talks about exactly that. Why we are still here partially because we have not fully reconciled with those roots that you were talking about, Scott, right? So they're there, and we haven't really said, okay, let's dig up this tree and let's think about how this country has built a system of laws and policies that have allowed that tree to grow strong, but to hide the truth about slavery and the truth about how slavery and racism are married. And a lot of people feel like, well, we've buried slavery, but racism persists. But they have a marriage, and that marriage continues to bear fruit. And until we reconcile with that, and we say, you know what, we do have laws that disproportionately affect certain individuals, right? So while we say we are united, we continue to have these laws that divide us. And so we have to recognize those laws, and we have to reconcile and actually fix them. I think we look at the Civil Rights Act and we look at Fair Housing Act, and those are some of the laws that are talked about in that book, and we go, this fixed it. But the reality is that it didn't. And unless we dig further and deeper and look at the policy and look at the actual language of those laws, we don't fully understand why it didn't fix it. It just didn't reconcile anything. It was a step, but it was not a full root cause. Let's reconcile. So I think that's why we're still here.
So Danielle and Scott, y'all started off with this metaphor of talking about roots and stuff like that. We're going to talk about roots. Let's talk about it, right? So I appreciated the fact that you brought up about, you're reading The Color of Law. It's right here on top of my desk.
I love that book.
I wish, obviously we're D&I professionals and we're constantly reading. We're constantly learning. We're constantly teaching each other and preaching to each other. And I would hope that other people will do their own work and learn. And then when you go out to learn, and you get books like The Color of Law and other books, what you're going to find is from the beginning, the roots, as Scott and Danielle was talking about, we've never dealt with it. And we never talked about it openly like this. We've dealt with some of the results of the frustration and the oppression and over policing and whatever, but we never really talked about it. So what we have to do now is talk about it. And here is the truth. The truth, somebody asked me at a recent panel discussion just like this, Doc, why are we still talking about this? What do y'all want? That was actually what it was. What do y'all want? And I said, well, thank you for asking it. Let me tell you what I want. Let me tell you what we want, what everybody wants. I want what the Pledge of Allegiance that I have said, all my life says. I want one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The reason we're still talking about it, because that's not the truth. That is not where we are. And the reason we're not there is because of race. And the reason race continues to be a dividing factor is because people are still in denial about racism. And as long as people continue to be in denial about it, then we can't have healthy, respectful, productive, courageous conversations like this and begin to deal with it. We have to help people understand what racism is. We have to have them understand the impacts of it. We have to help them understand that it's not enough to say, I'm not a racist. You should be saying, I'm an anti-racist. And I'm an anti-racist because I'm taking these actions. You have to confront and combat racist ideas and actions. And I'm not saying you have to hold up a Black Lives Matter poster and walk down the street, but there's other things that you can do. This book, The Color of Law, talks about the way laws impact on things like housing and education. If you live in a neighborhood and you have the ability to send your kid to a charter or private school, and you make that choice to do that, that's your choice. But you do realize that it may be better if you actually sent your kid to the under-resourced Black school and then fight like the Dickens to get that school the resources it needs so that it can be a better performing school. So You can do things that make sense and will make things better, but you have to. I was raised by my grandmama, and she told me, Toby, between perception, that's my nickname, y'all can't use it. Between perception and reality is the truth. We got to start dealing with the truth, folks. We got to start dealing with the truth.
So what makes it so hard for us to deal with the truth? It's interesting that what we're seeing unfold before us now this year is not new. It's not new. We've seen this, that the over policing, everything that has sparked the conversation, really, if you will. We've seen it happen before. But it's interesting that this time around, if we just look at the order of how things unfolded this year, first came COVID, right? And that in itself shined a spotlight on just the racial disparities in our healthcare system, right? So there was that piece. But then also COVID, if you will, sat us down, right? Sat us down. Workplaces began to send employees home. We couldn't go hardly anywhere. So we were almost forced to be still, to be in front of the television or be in front of our laptops, computers, our technology, and we couldn't escape. We couldn't escape. So I think heard one of you all say kind of this denial that's been in place, that's been taken away because we've all been in place and we couldn't escape. So now it's here in front of us. So now that we're here and we know we have to have the conversation, right, that is still happening, what makes having the conversation so hard? What makes having it so hard? Again, Scott, I want to toss this one to you to start us off.
Wow, I'm so lucky today to get tossed the ball.
Well, that's because, you're sitting down there in front of the beach and all of us are.
I see. This is called retribution. This is called conscious bias, not unconscious bias. Let's call it out for what it is.
I need to take your workshop again.
Well, your question is, why is it so hard? And the story that I've been telling lately in our virtual educational sessions for our clients is that when all of this happened, starting with Ahmet Aubrey in my home state of Georgia, and then definitely with the extremely visible George Floyd videotape, I looked at my own reading library, and I'm acknowledging to the people on here that I wasn't doing what Shelton said. I wasn't keeping up to speed on things, and I decided to. I'm really revealing too much right now, but I have fallen out of the habit of reading. In the age of so much video content and social media, I've fallen out of the habit of reading. So I'm not embarrassed to say that I got Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, on audiobook. And the story that I've been telling is I'm finally done with it, but it took me several weeks. And I'm a professional, as Karen said, I'm a professional who has been trying to get people for many, many years to take a look at themselves, how they see the world, how they've been programmed to see the world through racialized lenses, through genderized lenses, if that's a word, to see it through a unique set of lenses shaped by our upbringing, our culture, our identity, our orientation, our generational group. Everything that causes us to be us has shaped us to have a unique perspective on the world. So that's me, and I can't listen to more than one chapter of her book in one sitting. I push, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's my favorite book that I've read or heard. And the reason that I have to stop after every chapter is I have to process my feelings of feeling crappy. Probably shouldn't say that on the webcast, but feeling dirty, feeling guilty, feeling powerless. I started using the word impotent in the way that it really should be used. I feel, even though I have a consulting firm that's training thousands of people a year, I feel like I'm not doing enough. And all of those feelings cause me at the end of each chapter to, turn on CNN, turn on Bravo, turn on something so that I can get out of those feelings. So to answer the question more directly, we have trouble having the conversation because it makes those of us that have the power, we'll talk later about privilege, I think, who have the privilege of not having to think about our skin color, it makes us uncomfortable and it makes us feel feelings that we normally try to stay away from. And therein lies the essence of the problem. Unless a bunch of, like I thought about the people on this call, as we say in the South, we're probably preaching to the choir today. If somebody decided, thank you everyone that's on the webinar, but you care enough about this, you've probably already been in study, you've already, maybe you have some skin in the game and you're a person of color. So the folks that can and should be diving into the discomfort are folks that have the power. And that's predominantly white folks. Lots of them are men. And it doesn't feel good. So Robin DiAngelo says, white people are willing to stay in the conversation until it gets uncomfortable. That's a generalization. Not every white person runs for the hills, but I see defensiveness. I see anger. I see, the last thing I'll say and let some other voices in is, I see a very common phenomenon, which is when my friend Karen or when my friend Wendy or when my friend H, all are who are African-American, tell me about an experience that they've had in their life, whether it was last week, last month, or 5 years ago, the tendency that I have, and remember, I'm in this stuff, the tendency is for my brain to say, there's no way, there's no way, that's not the world I live in. And there you have it. We go back to, I see the world through my filters. And if I can't step into Karen's world and say, whoa, tell me more about that because it's not my experience, then an opportunity is lost for me to go into that discomfort and come out on the other side with some new wiring in my brain that'll cause me to see this whole topic in a different way.
But Scott, so let me pick up on that because you're being in the space and we being colleagues and friends and have known each other for a long time. You have the privilege of talking to people like me, like Karen. But Karen's, the question was, why is it difficult? It's not difficult to talk about this. Black people talk about this all the time with each other. White people talk about
Right.
this all the time with each other. Hispanics people talk about it. What has made it a challenge is when people cross, like you said, and you're in the space, even when you're talking to me, you still have certain feelings like, gosh, that can't be happening. And, how's that possible that we live in the same metro area and we live, we have some different experiences. So the conversation is difficult because once we start talking, now I can't pick and choose and try to make you feel comfortable, right? And likewise, I can't marginalize the fact that you say, wow, is that really possible? So what we have to work through and what we have to fight through with intentionality is the guilt, the shame, the marginalization, the disbelief, the denial, and start dealing with the facts. And then I have to help you and you have to help me. And I can't expect you to fix everything. And you can't say to me, Shelton, tell me what I need to do, because it's not on you to try to fix everything. So what we try to say is walk away, reflect, learn, and then figure out what's the one or two things Scott can do differently or better. And it's not up to me to say to you, Scott, it's your fault. And it's everybody like you, it's your fault. When you do that, you shut the conversation down.
Absolutely.
That's what it gets difficult. So anyway, Danielle, I know you want to jump in here, so go ahead and jump in, Danielle.
Yeah, and if I can, so in the work that I do here in our community, in our diversity task force, a lot of times what we see is that we have that really difficult conversation across races, right? So we live in a very diverse community, and so lately I've been getting the question like, oh my God, I didn't realize, is it really that bad? Like, are those things that actually happen? And it's like, yes. And kind of what you get back is that because that's not a white person's reality, it's very difficult for them to conceptualize that actually happens. And so then as we've been doing the work and we've been reaching out to other leaders in the community to try to keep our foot on the gas of we need to keep having these conversations and then taking actual action, then sometimes what you see is that our allies begin to get weary, right? Because they do want to escape the discomfort of police brutality, of disparity with how we treat children in terms of punitive actions within the schools, right? How athletics plays also a very real, very palpable racial, uh, it's a very big actor, right, in our community, because we live in a community that's very mixed, but then also it's changing very quickly, right, because of the attention we get with athletics, right? And so you start to see your neighbors and those in your community, they get very weary. They don't want to talk about it. They want to escape it. And while I'm not able to escape it and they are, then that again creates that chasm between us being able to have that conversation. They're retreating from it because it doesn't feel good. We're used to that pain, right? One of the things I told another person on the task force was this pain is very useful because we're very used to it, right? So we know what to do with it. I'm able to mobilize and to use my voice to advocate for others because we don't get weary, because this has been our life. It's not been a moment, it's my life. So.
So Danielle, if I can just pick up on that point of weariness, how do we as Black people, as African Americans and other people of color, how do we push forward in this state of weariness? Because weariness is different than just being tired, right? Weariness is different than just being fatigued. That there's something very unique about being weary. I mean, it puts you in a totally different place. So how do we, as African Americans, as Black people, how do we, one, make sure that we, in our weariness, stay open to the conversation, right? And do all that we can to keep pushing forward and not just give up, because this is heavy, and it's a burden even on us, that we carry, but we do it. And for those coming behind us, we definitely don't want to stop carrying the burden. We're standing on the shoulders of those who even, came before us. Others will be standing on our shoulders. So how do we, in our weariness, right, keep things moving forward in a positive way? So that Danielle, you or Shelton, you all can share your thoughts on that question. Go ahead,
I
Danielle.
think it's a really loaded question, and I don't know that I have the answer, because I do get tired. I get tired a lot because it feels like almost like a broken record. And sometimes you feel like a broken record, even talking to the same people. And again, I think it's just that disconnect between you're telling me this, but my reality is so different. I can't even conceptualize of you're afraid for your husband to leave the house sometimes. Yeah, I am. And this is why. And it's you kind of get down because you're going, I keep telling you this and you're not listening. And so I think for me, what keeps me going though, is that when I make those connections with someone and they go, oh, finally I get it. And now I want to do something. And that's one of the things also that I hear a lot in the task force is, well, what can I specifically do? And I have a really close friend. She and I have been friends for 20 years. And she said that she moved to Missouri, and she said, I have been telling my children, when you go out and you protest, you put yourself between the police and someone who's Black, because that outcome is going to be different for you than it would for them. And so when you see that, that changes how you feel, right? And it gives you energy. It energizes you to keep going and to keep creating relationships and to keep talking and to keep educating. And that's one of the things that I do with my kids is I'm really, really big on, let's read these books. Let's talk about these concepts, because I do all this for you, right? So that the next generation doesn't have to push and they don't have to be weary, right? Hopefully, right? Our fingers are crossed, hopefully. And so those are the things that keep me going. But then also, being really honest, is self-care. Sometimes I completely dissociate. I go, I want to watch a rom-com movie that's completely silly, right? Or I want to watch Star Wars, all, 500 of them with my kids and pretend that I'm somewhere else where this isn't a problem. Or, I just want to sit outside, or I want to go do something. Or, one of the great distractions has been my kids' sports, because even though they play sports that there's not a lot of Black people in them, it's just a joy to see them doing something that they enjoy. And so then I get joy from that. And then that gives me that moment to recharge and to remember why we have to keep pushing, and to hopefully get that feeling of, I've made these connections and this is something that my kids will benefit from.
Awesome. Shelton?
Yeah, let me try to pick up on that and then tie it back also to the last question that you asked. Karen, I think you already summed it up, that we can't afford to get weary. We stand on the shoulders of those that came before. I've got 2 sons, 3 sons and a daughter that we got to help make a better community and country for. So that we don't have any choice. There's all kind of sayings that our grandmother and things we learned coming up in church. I remember the first time I heard, when the rope breaks, you reach beyond the rope, and all of that. So we already know that. That's been our life. I think Danielle said, I can't say it any better. But in terms of personal, for me, I'm a writer and a learner, a lifelong learner. So after, and Karen, you said this is not new, and why is this conversation difficult? Back when we had following the deaths of Trayvon and Michael Brown and Eric Gardner and so many more, I wrote a book entitled Crisis as a Platform for Social Change, from Strawberry Mansion to Silicon Valley. And that was my way of processing the fact that in a 12-month period between 2014 and 2015, 117 unarmed Black men had been killed by law enforcement. And it was that, and again, this is several years ago when my children were even younger. I had to process that. One of the things I did in writing that book, I interviewed over 100 law enforcement leaders from across the country. These are chiefs of police, directors of public safety, even a couple of people from Homeland Security. And I was criticized for that, because people said, hey, you don't need to hear the other side. But you do need to hear the other side. That's a part of getting through this. When you actually take a minute to be intentional about learning, why is it that we have in 2020 someone getting shot, 7 times in the back? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So me, again, the question is, how do you fight through the weariness? I have to continue to learn. Being in this space, I'm being asked to consult and coach and help other people, help companies, communities in the country be better. So me, I try to fight through my weariness by just trying to learn as much as I can. That's why I'm reading and writing and participating in panels like this, because I'm still trying to learn. But like everyone else, there are times where, even though I love Rachel, I can't watch her. You just have to disconnect. And I'm fortunate that I have a spouse that was formerly in this space as well. And so I have the privilege of being able to have a confidant that I can talk to. But now she's telling me, you know what, we need to have a day where we just don't talk about this. Let's pick a day, and it's Fridays. And now it's 2 days, it's Fridays and Sundays, where we just completely disconnect. And we have so much more to be grateful for and thankful for and prayerful for. And so on Fridays we disconnect, and then on Sundays we just pray for better companies, better communities, and a better country, because that's the people. That's the way I was raised by my grandmother. You have to have faith.
Hey, can I ask Shelton a follow-up question, Karen? Is that cool?
Sure, please. Yes, sure.
I picked up on some. I really want to draw you out on the research and the phone calls that you had, interviews that you did with police chiefs and officers, because you referred to them as other side, or someone in your world said, why are you talking to the other side? So I think that's might be a good double click for you to to kind of dive into, because our polarized culture, politically, now racially, like it's like, I know some black people, some white people looked at the George Floyd tape and didn't see it the way I did, didn't see it the way you did. And that blows my mind, but that's the essence of what we were talking about earlier, that people in my family have made statements, older relatives, but some not older, things like, well, I heard he passed a bad $20 bill. Or, why did that guy in the Wendy's parking lot, why did he go running? It's like that, I'm a little off track. What I really am focused on is, how are we going to get there if people do see Black folks and police as us versus them? Because not all Black people have bad intentions, and not all cops use undue force and hurt people, right? So I'll just leave it there. What did you learn from those interviews that caused you to see things differently on that subject? That's my question.
And I'm not. So my experience is unique. As an Air Force officer, one of the things I was asked to do by the Air Force was go be a loan executive for the Montgomery Police Department, and I taught in their police academy for 18 months. So these are people actually going through the academy, and we didn't call it diversity then, Scott, but it definitely was multicultural policing and being able to communicate with people that are different. In the book, I shared a story that as an Air Force officer, I was pulled over in uniform and handcuffed and put on the street face down by police who said I resembled someone who just robbed a store. How could that I'm in full uniform, full Air Force Blues uniform, rank, ribbons, everything. And so imagine this. What is the likelihood? What is it? How can a person, and this is what I was asked when I was going around lecturing on the book. How could you have gotten over serving your country on the way back from teaching a course at the police academy, be pulled over by the same police that your future cadet takes training, be put on the ground in uniform, in handcuffs, and then why would you even want to talk to people? That was to put the question in full context. And I told them, now, again, that story, of course, had a bad outcome for those officers after the mayor of the city and the police chief, the officers wound up being dismissed. But that's what I'm saying. Karen, the question was, why is it so difficult for people to talk to to have this conversation? You have to force yourself to work through your anger. You got to do as a part of your own work, and realize, I know I'm angry. I know how I feel about this, but how is it that what is it that I can learn? And so talking to those dozens of law enforcement officers, they said the same thing you said. Obviously there are a number of African Americans and others serving on the police force, and not everybody's bad. So I just needed to know the mentality. I know what the training was. Heck, I was teaching at a police academy, and I know they weren't teaching some of the procedures and practices. But when faced in a situation, we saw that some people were not executing the training as whatever. So what this conversation, this panel won't allow me, but I just need to put it in context. It was after everything you went through, and then that's when the rest of it. Why would you want to talk to, the other side, the people you're trying to help, turned around and hurt you? Why would you turn the other cheek? That was basically what was being implied. And so I'll leave it there.
Thanks.
But I think it's important that you did that, Shelton. I think it's extremely important that we try to understand, to find that common thread of, okay, I can get your logic, so then I can speak to that, and then maybe then that opens up more dialogue. My sister goes, she goes, oh, I was on Fox News and I can't, I looked at their Facebook page and I can't, and I'm going, but I do it all the time because I want to understand. My opinion doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. There has to be something in why someone else has a differing opinion, why someone can look at a video of someone dying in 8 minutes and disassociate themselves from the humanity of that. There has to be something psychologically that allows them to not see that human suffering and go, that's wrong. There has to be something there. Whether we agree with it, whether we like it, is immaterial. But if we can understand it, then maybe it's like, okay, so this is now how we can have a dialogue, and maybe I can change your mind about how you saw that. Maybe I can then get you to go, oh no, that is a really awful, terrible thing to happen to another person. Not a Black person, not a man, but another person just like you, right? It's about building, I think, that connection. And sometimes it is very painful to try to understand someone's logic that to you just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. But I think that's how we build the bridge for the conversation.
Fantastic. All right. Okay. Now we're getting into the thick of it, right? So I have one more question for the panel before we go to questions from the audience. And then, of course, there are several questions that we'll come back to for the panel. But it's interesting, maybe even somewhat ironic that, again, here we are having this conversation. We find ourselves as a country in the same place. Yet again, you think about in 2020, we've lost civil rights icons and activists this year. Joseph Lowry, C.T. Vivian, John Lewis. And in the midst of that has started conversations that actually have already been going on about statues and monuments being removed. But now there's a lot of discussion around, is it time to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the John Lewis Bridge, or whatever it may be. And just recently this week, I've started hearing conversations where over 4,000 plus people have signed a petition to rename a statue in Chadwick Boseman's hometown, right? To actually take down a Confederate statue and replace it with a statue of Chadwick in honor of him and what he represents and what the citizens of his hometown want their city to reflect going forward in the future. So Danielle, we'll start with you with this question. Why is there such a movement to tear down historical statues? There are some people who believe, and we're not saying it's right or it's wrong, but it's just the belief of some people that, our history is our history and that we shouldn't replace it. We shouldn't, tear it down. And then there are others who believe and feel that, well, our history is not that bright, it's not that positive, and we don't want to be reminded of it. So, this whole conversation around removing statues, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it stems from the conversation and maybe the reluctance to remove those things comes from a place where we're not being intellectually honest with ourselves, and that you erect a statue or a monument to someone to say, this is something that we love, this is something that we stand behind, this is who we are, that represents you. And so as a Black person in this country, if I go to a park and I see a statue of someone who tore this country apart because of slavery to keep me, as a slave, my ancestors as slaves, that sends a message to me. It sends a message to me that this is what this country celebrates, right? It doesn't make me feel welcome. It doesn't make me feel like, yep, that represents me as an American. It does exactly the opposite. And so I feel like when we say, oh, but it's a part of our history and we don't want to forget it, I don't think we could ever forget it. I don't think we need a monument to a secessionist government that attempted to create something completely different than what we are right now. There is no way, again, that I could conceptualize that a Black person would go, yes, the Edmund Pettus Bridge named after someone, you know, who from my understanding was a part of the Klan is a good thing. And it makes me feel good as an American. And so that is why it is about tearing down things that initially were erected, right, to remind Black folks of their place in the, I mean, if we're being intellectually honest, that's why they're there in the first place. And so if we, again, want to do the hard work of reconciling and saying, this is not who we are, this is not who we want to be, we don't want to erect monuments to something that's antithetical to who we are as a country, then yeah, they should come down. Absolutely. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, no, your opinion is spot on. And man, I'm so glad you said that, because you call it intellectual honesty. I call it the truth. A lot of these monuments were built specifically to send a message. And so when you talk about the intellectually honest, go to, I would challenge anyone, go to the monuments. And this is what you're going to find. In most cases, the complete history is not true. It's not there. So even where statues are not being torn down, you have some cities that are now putting them in their proper historical context to give you the entire truth. And part of that entire truth is that the statue in the monument was specifically erected to send a message. So how do you send a new message? You take the monument down. It's not that complicated, folks. All you have to do is do your homework. All you have to do is do some research, and you will find that 99.999% of these statues and monuments were erected specifically in post-Reconstruction and Jim Crow to send a message. This is the truth. This is the same truth of why you have segregated schools. Look at the history of HBC. Look at the history of the country, and you will find you had some people that felt a certain way. And then what happened, particularly in post-Reconstruction, was there were public policies and laws put in place to reinforce what people wanted to be the new reality. And you can't escape the truth, guys. Brown versus education shouldn't have been necessary, but you had Plessy versus Ferguson in 1894 that said separate is equal. That was the law. Brown versus education in 54 says separate is inherently unequal, but it wasn't really enforced until the Civil Rights Act, many years later. And then, of course, people said we had a watershed moment. The country had a watershed moment with the election of a Black president. I would remind people, even though he was elected twice, he got more death threats. Him and his family got more death threats than the previous 9 presidents combined. That you have to look at the truth. I'm a public policy guy. That's what my doctorate is in. It's studying the policies and the laws of the United States of America and how they have created the current country we're in. If you're going to change that, you either have to change the laws, which you've not seen anything happen out of this recent Congress and Senate. In fact, they're going the opposite way. Or what you're going to have is people taking action in their own hands. This is not new.
Scott, your thoughts?
Well, mine's quick because Danielle and Shelton went deeper than I can go on that. But my perception, and I may not be right, but statues are the branches of the tree. They are visible representations of the roots of our country. So that's, I just thought of it, but kind of tearing them down is low-hanging fruit for us to feel like we're doing something about racism in the United States. In our workshops, we added, Karen, more than anybody on the call, we do that activity where we ask people to move out of the line if the statement that we read applies to them. So we've added a couple new statements in light of what's happened this year. And one of them is, you step to the line. On virtual, it's raise your hand, just like I'm doing right now. And we say, move to the line if you can explain at least one example of systemic racism. So systemic racism is really more the roots of the tree. It's really hard to see the systems that are in place that were fed from that 400 years of root building of the tree. And I tell people, because I told you I don't read as much as I used to, I'm more of a documentary guy. Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th is what I point them to, because in 90 minutes, she takes you from the end of slavery, the end of slavery, to sharecropping and putting debtors prison and into mass incarceration, the monetization of prisons. She draws a direct line that shows that the reason so many Black folks are in jail goes back to slavery. The things are directly tied, and that's the roots of the tree. So unless we can dig those out and look at them, and like she tried to do in that did beautifully in that documentary, we're never going to be able to, we're going to be playing with statues. And he didn't say Black Lives Matters, he said all lives matters. I know that that's important, and maybe we should talk about that, but we're up there in the jewelry of the situation instead of the foundation of the situation.
Yeah, fantastic. And Scott, I'm going to echo the accolades that you gave to 13. So the viewing audience, already you have two resources, The Color of Law and then 13th, which is right now it's on Netflix. I would encourage everyone, as Scott said, it's 90 minutes. It is a very worthwhile document to watch, and your time will be well spent if you have an opportunity this coming, holiday weekend where we really can't go anywhere, right? We're not supposed to be traveling and all of that. So with that, Jackie, how about we turn it over to you for any questions that have come in from the audience?
So this isn't really a question, but talking about resources, there was trying to find it now, sorry. So recommended, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend The Warmth of Other Suns. It's a book about the Great Migration and illustrates how so much still needed to be done after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, got it. I think I see it. Go ahead, Carnessa. Yeah.
And this comes from Nick Horn, and first, thank you guys very much for presenting. How should I engage someone in the best way to change their mind and heart, who acknowledges that these events are horrible, but who refuses to see them as a racial problem? They think it's socioeconomic, etc.
I think acknowledging that some of those things are socioeconomic, right? They are. Socioeconomic status and race are also married, right? They are. And so I think maybe, again, acknowledging that and then pointing out how they are also married sometimes helps develop that conversation. And so a friend of mine years ago, she goes, I don't think that racism is going to be our next generation problem any longer. It's going to be economics. And the truth is that we can look at individuals who are wealthy and who are rich, and they still experience racism. And so I don't know how else you can account for some of those things, right? We live in, like I said, a fairly mixed middle income, community, and we make a good deal of money, but that does not insulate my children from racism. And so I don't know how you can point those things out to someone and they can still not understand. And the information is out there. There's tons of information out there. And so it is also challenging someone to attempt to educate themselves past what they can conceptualize.
You know what, Danielle, follow-up question for you on that. Your background in the financial arena, financial services and mortgage lending, as we talk about economics, social justice, you could speak to, I'm sure you've seen, redlining Kind of talk to us about what that means and how, even racism fits into that. Kind of, we don't always recognize it there. And in 13th, of course, the topic comes up. But share with us a little bit about what you've seen in your industry and your expertise in your area around financial services and mortgage lending.
Yeah. I think that in the last maybe 10 years, since we had our last economic recession, I think that was actually about 12 years ago, right? So we started to see a lot that came out of that about subprime lending. And for anyone who doesn't know, subprime lending is it's lending that it's not quite predatory, but it's not exactly the best that you probably could get, right? The interest rate is probably higher. You might have had to put more money down. Just it's different, right? And it's not necessarily based off of your credit profile. It could be based off of a lot of other things. And so some of the fallout that we were starting to see from that subprime lending was that there were financial institutions who were pushing people of color and specifically Black people towards these subprime loans. And part of the reason is they were considering in their underwriting metrics that, oh, someone Black, regardless of the fact that they may make six figures, may not pay this loan back. And so if I give them a subprime loan, then they're going to pay more interest on it and I'm going to make my money regardless. And again, we have to practice some intellectual honesty and say, we know how mortgages work. We know how banks work. Banks are in it to make money. And they are hedging when they're doing underwriting. They're hedging to say, if I lend this person this money, how likely are they to give it back to me and pay me back? And so they were injecting into that some disparate treatment. Right. And when we talk about mortgages and about financial institutions, and in compliance and in law, one of the things that we are always very worried about is disparate treatment and disparate impact. Disparate treatment is I treat you differently because you are Black or because you are a woman or because you are old or because you are a veteran, right? There are these prohibited bases and these vulnerable populations. I treat them differently on purpose. I push back people or single mothers or those who receive disability come to homes because I think they're going to be better, right? Okay, that's disparate treatment. Nobody wants to fall into that. That's like being outwardly racist, right? So you don't really see that so much. But what we do still see, and the reason I was speaking about subprime lending and about the past recession is we do still see disparate impact. Disparate impact says I've created one rule, but it impacts different populations differently, okay? And so we have a neighbor who, is a really good friend of my husband's, and he says, I don't understand how laws are any different for Black people than they are for white people. And so one of the examples I gave him is that penalties for crack versus heroin are completely different. Why? Statistically speaking, crack is a cheaper drug. You see it more in urban and inner city neighborhoods. That allows you to lock up certain people easier than individuals who can afford heroin, which is a more expensive drug. Okay. So again, when you have those discussions though, and you can see those pieces, those statistically relevant pieces, you have to practice intellectual honesty with yourself and recognize what those facts are telling you. The facts are telling you that you have disparate impact, okay? I wrote one law, but I have these two different groups of individuals who are experiencing the execution of that law in very different ways. And so in financial services and in compliance, we are constantly attempting to not have those things because it is against the law. And we do use statistics and data to say, okay, well, we can see where we're getting into a risky area here. We want to move away from that, right? We want things to be as equitable and as legal as they can be. But speaking in a social sense, disparate treatment and disparate impact are still very much there. Again, disparate treatment is being outwardly racist. Disparate impact is I treat someone differently in terms of maybe we'll say hiring. If I see someone has a name that doesn't sound American, I don't push their resume forward. Someone whose name sounds American, I push it that way, right? And so then you do start to see, we have equitable hiring practices. We take resumes from everyone. We interview everyone. We give jobs to everyone. The truth is that can't be true. That's not true. It's not honest. We're practicing intellectual dishonesty at that point, right? because we refuse to acknowledge the facts of what data and what actually happens, and reconcile that. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Danielle. I think, Scott, were you about, what did you want to share?
Not on that topic. No, I'll hold off.
Okay.
I want a piece of it. I want a piece.
Okay.
I want a piece of it because I love to hear attorneys and I know that she's talking about disparate impact and treatment, and I wish people understood the importance of what she just said, because these are things you talk about, systemic racism and these roots and things like this. And so again, just 2 seconds to piggyback. If a bank says, and we knew after the financial downturn that they wanted to mitigate risk. So they did things like increase down payment requirements and raise credit scores. And they did it supposedly saying it's going to have a neutral impact. It's neutral. It's not intended to be racist. But the fact of the matter is it had impact, disproportionate impact. The problem that I have is disparate treatment, we understand. But this thing about disparate impact, when it's brought to your attention by the Danielles of the world, what do? You just hunch your shoulders and says, well, underwriting says that's the way it's going to be, or do you take actions that could help mitigate and lessen that impact? Do you do financial? Do you have any special programs? Do you have any financial literacy? There's things that financial institutions do, and they do it all the time. Right now, somebody's on this call saying, well, that sounds like affirmative actions and stuff like this. But trust me, financial institutions do things for their preferred customers that they don't do for other people all the time. And so, I love you, Danielle, for what you said, because again, if people just knew that what she calls the intellectual dishonesty that takes place, you would be surprised. When I went to Philadelphia, I had a 25% down, and the company that was going to give me an additional 10% to help. And I went to it, and I had pre-approved financing. But my realtor says, hey, let's go to a local bank to get you a better loan. And she told the bank all the stuff until I got there, and they found out that I wanted to go into an exclusive community. All of a sudden, my 38% down payment and 700 plus credit score wasn't good enough. So disparate treatment is still alive, but then there's disparate, and when you combine it with the impact of increased down payments, higher credit scores required, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that gets back to that point that Scott was talking about those roots, and they're constantly being watered in 2020. That's the problem. So I'm not trying to change anybody's hearts and minds. I'm trying to give them the truth.
Okay. Thank you, Shelton and Danielle. So now we have a little bit more knowledge when it comes to the financial arena, right? To the financial arena and how we see things begin to show up that we possibly didn't recognize were going on. So Scott, I want to turn the conversation to you. As we're having conversations these days, there are a lot of terms that are coming into play that are somewhat nuanced, terms we've never heard before, that we've never talked about before. Fragility, white fragility, right? That's kind of a phrase, or it's the name of a book. But there's also this topic, this word that continues to come up around privilege, specifically white privilege. So share your perspective with us on what does white privilege mean? How do we see it show up? How should it not be used? Enlighten us on this word, this topic of privilege.
So you got to give that one to the white guy on the panel, I guess. That's the way it works, right? Yeah.
Of course.
It's my privilege to give you an answer. Well, we talk about that a lot because at the core of this conversation is that if white folks don't recognize that we do have privilege, then we can't actually be anti-racist. We can't actually be allies. So it's kind of like it has to start there to be able to have a new way of seeing things. So in our work, we frequently hear white folks push back on that two-word expression, white privilege, and they say, I'm sick and tired of people implying that because I'm white, I've had things easy. I had to work my way through college. My parents couldn't afford to pay for college. I came out of school with debt. I have not had an easy road. And I try to start from that point to say, let's focus on this idea of being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. We all have heard that expression. So can you acknowledge that if somebody is born into one of those Northeastern, wealthy Carnegie, I don't even know who they are, the Carnegies, give me one, I don't know, the Rockefellers, right? That obviously they would have access to more privileges than me growing up in South Central Pennsylvania on a farm with a dad with an associate's degree who, struggled to put food on the table. Obviously, that rich guy would have more privileges than my family. They get that idea. So then the way I kind of lay it out is, if you're a guy, can you acknowledge that you have some privileges in this world that was built by men for men? Think about the tree, the roots of that tree. Women didn't have the right to vote. Women were seen as property of men. They couldn't have credit cards. I mean, we don't have to go back that far to see how things were and are still unfair for women. And sometimes if a guy is honest, I'll say, would you rather be a guy or a woman in our culture? Rarely does a guy, I'm just pulling back the curtain on the guy world, rarely does a guy say, I would love to be a woman. And we recognize that we have things easier because we're men in this culture and society. I don't have to work. I've never worried about sexual assault. Every woman I know has worried about sexual assault or has been sexually assaulted or knows someone who's been sexually assaulted. So then I'm like, well, it's not much of a step to go to race because the tree was built by white folks to benefit white folks. The roots of the tree are still there to benefit white folks. And so I don't want to meander, but I have shared, maybe y'all have seen it. If you know my Shiro, she calls herself America's first diversity trainer, Jane Elliott, who was the third grade teacher, another resource that folks listening in, if you just find on pbs.org, the episode called A Class Divided. She's a racial justice warrior, a white woman. And a video clip always circulates around on social media of her in a lecture hall with an all-white college audience. And it's powerful. She says, white folks in this audience, they pan, there's no non-white folks in the audience. She goes, stand up if you would be willing to trade places with Black folks and have their experience in the United States versus yours. And nobody stands up. The camera pans out to 200 people in the auditorium. And she's fiery. She says, perhaps you didn't understand my question. I said, stand up if you'd be willing to change places with Black people in our society. And then when no one stands up, she says, you have just acknowledged that you have privilege based on your skin color. And if you aren't using that to fight, to dismantle the system that's putting your fellow citizens at a disadvantage, then you are playing into the system that was created for your benefit. And you're acknowledging that you're still benefiting. And so this goes back to Shelton saying, what are you going to do about it when you see the systemic process in your organization or in your neighborhood or in your schools? What are you going to do about it? If you don't try to dismantle it, then you're a passive supporter. You're tacitly saying, I like my privilege. If I let other people have equity, then I might lose some of my privilege. And therein lies the whole, to me, it's the whole source of the issue is white folks, not all white folks, but a lot of white folks are nervous about if the pie becomes equitable, am I going to have less pie?
That's real.
And this is probably my closing statement. I want to give other people a chance to talk, but I was thinking today in the shower, which is where I have all my good ideas getting ready for this panel, that because of the way I grew up, it wasn't until I was 33 years old and I was on a diversity training project with IBM and I was assigned to work many days with African-American women. We co-presented back in those days. It wasn't until those deep, long conversations at 33 years of age that I started to see race from the perspective of outside of myself and started to recognize, wow, I haven't had experiences in my life that have caused me. I'm a gay man, and I haven't had nearly the amount of pain and frustration and barriers that my friends of color have had. And then that was the piece I wanted to share, that we share in our workshops, that something called contact theory is really the only way to disrupt biased patterns of thinking. And it can't just be one of my friends at work is Black. It can't be some of my friends in college were Black. Whatever white people say sometimes to say, I'm not racist. And then we provide, if you have to provide an explanation of why you're not racist, you might be racist. I don't know if that's the case, but and so therein lies the final thing that I'll say is, if it's a conundrum, if we can't have significant, deep relationships with people that are different than us, we can't rewire the way we see the world. And at the same time, I tell my white friends, don't rely on Black folks to educate you on what the problems are, because they're always asked to solve the problems. We are the ones that should be diving into the books, the movies, and we need to reach across and say, hey, let's have coffee. And I want to talk to you, and I'm nervous because I think I might ask something that sounds ignorant. To develop, you get where I'm going with this. Unless white folks take the chance to build significant, solid, trusting relationships with people that are different, we're destined to be in the same conversation a year from now, 2 years from now. And then this is my final thing, that we use a lot of expressions around water to talk about why we have to stay in this if we care about it. We will get weary, but if we step out, then we're not a part of the process. So I was thinking about that story about, it made a difference to that starfish. If you don't know the story, you can Google it. That's the punchline. We're throwing pebbles into the lake and creating ripples, and we don't know how far the ripples will go. We're like a wave on the ocean. We can't see the whole ocean, but we're part of it. Like so many expressions about water. I'm determined till the end of my days to keep doing, even if they're perceived as little things, because I can't boil the ocean. That's another one around water. I'm determined to keep doing the little things that I can from where I am with what I have. So I want that to be my last word, because we're coming up on the end of the clock.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for all that you do, and for pouring out your heart in your response to the question around white privilege, and for allowing yourself to be vulnerable and transparent with us on, 33 plus years before your eyes were open. That's huge. That is huge. And thank you for the challenge to take a risk, right? To take a risk. Thank you for that. Cornessa, I think we're going to come to you. We have, let's see if we can get maybe one or two questions in from the audience. And oh my goodness, we're close to 2:30. But let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can get a couple of questions in from the audience. Cornessa.
Okay, thank you. We have one question from Connor McGrath, who said, I have employees who've voiced their support for our current president, but believe they are perceived as wrong due to the connections and rhetoric Trump has displayed related to injustice. How do we separate this from political views?
Anybody?
I'm not going there.
Scott is bowed out. Shelton, Danielle.
I don't think there's enough time. But I'm not even sure that the question is framed right, because it goes back to me, somebody said earlier about our hearts and minds. I think what you have to do is, in that situation, I'll be real quick, is you have to listen, you have to learn, and the acceptance doesn't mean agreement. I respect and accept that people have different opinions, different beliefs, different values, and because I treat them with dignity and respect, that doesn't mean I agree. And so I think that may be, again, one of those hearts versus minds, which I don't get into hearts and minds, but I don't try to, and again, when people say they try to change hearts and minds, you're trying to get people to agree with you. I'm not trying to get you to agree. I accept the fact that you see things differently. And I respect the fact that you're entitled to view things differently. And because I accept that doesn't mean I agree. So I'll leave my comment there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not about persuasion or acceptance. It's about just saying, acknowledging that someone is allowed to have a political or a social view that's differing from yours. I don't try to persuade. I don't try to argue. If someone wants to engage me in a discussion about, specific policy or decisions, you can't argue with rhetoric, right? And I think that's the reason why politicians like it, because it's very difficult to argue with it. What I like to do is I like to stick to facts and to data, right? As a compliance manager, that's where I live, right? So you can't really argue with things that are facts. You can't really argue with things that are historically accurate and true. And so that's where I operate from. I don't attempt to persuade anyone based off of rhetoric. You can believe whatever you want, but I know what facts are, right? And so I steep my opinions and how I operate off of that.
Yeah, and I respect the person's question, but that would be like somebody saying, "Well, Shelton, you support the Black Lives Movement, so you must support looting and burning and stuff like that." That's what it feels like to me. Yeah, so again,
Well, I think it's okay. Yeah.
No, I said I'm out on that one. I had my last word. I meant it.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, Carnessa, forgive us. We have run not out of time, but with just 2 minutes left. And of course, we want to be respectful and honoring of everyone's time. We're going to thank the panel. Such a great discussion. Time went by so fast. You all have given us a lot to think about. I'm glad that the session was recorded so we can go back and listen to it. And again, we had some resources that came out of the discussion. The Warmth of Other Suns, I believe, was mentioned as a book to read. Scott, you mentioned the Netflix documentary 13th. And then we had the conversation about The Color of Law, in case anyone is interested in resources for this holiday weekend. So thank you all again. It's been my pleasure. Love you all tremendously. And we'll have to do this again. I think we make a nice little, what can we say? Quad? Would you make a quad package, the four of us?
I think we just have a pilot now to send off to the networks, and maybe it'll be on Sunday afternoon with Meet the Press, or I don't know. I think we just created a pilot.
If we can work that around softball and baseball, I'm there. You let me know.
We just need something like a red table or something, something.
To complement it. To complement the pink.
Thanks, WinUp, and thanks, Karen, and thanks to all the coordinators. Yeah.
Before we end, I think Tara Scales, you still here? I believe you have a closing for us.
Sure. I'm going to make this quick. Good afternoon. My name is Tara Scales. I'm the current chair of AAERG. On behalf of AAERG and WinUp, we would like to thank each and every one of you for taking your time out of today to participate in this 90-minute discussion on social justice. Who would have thought that a virus named COVID-19 would stop the world in its tracks and force each of us to have these in-depth conversations? These are tough conversations to have. We must continue these conversations and create a plan which will begin changes within the local communities in which we reside. So I am encouraging every one of you that is viewing this to do the following. Continue these conversations. We all know these conversations can be uncomfortable. To make progress, you have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Look at history. We can't erase history, but we can learn from it. Talk to your coworkers and learn more about them. What you see is not always what you get. Grow in your new knowledge of what we discussed today. Reading to the mind is what exercise is to the body. And finally, do not be afraid to stand up for what's right. Please be a voice and not an echo. So thank you, everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Be safe. Holiday weekend. Mhm.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Jackie, are you still on?
Yeah, here.
I'm here.
Okay, we can end the recording, I think, now, yes.
Yeah, that's what